The empath sits in a crowded room, surrounded by laughter and conversation, and they know something no one else does. They know the woman across the table is about to cry when she gets home. They know the man telling the loud story is performing because he's terrified of silence. They know the couple in the corner isn't going to make it another 6 months, and they can't explain how they know any of this. They just do. Carl Jung spent decades trying to understand people like this. People who carried perceptual abilities so unusual that the psychiatric establishment wanted to diagnose them as disordered rather than gifted. What Jung found changed everything. These individuals weren't suffering from overactive imaginations or poor psychological boundaries. They possessed genuine cognitive and perceptual capacities that most human beings simply don't have access to. Jung called these capacities spiritual gifts, not because they were mystical or otherworldly, but because they operated at the level of psyche and spirit, perceiving essences that surface-level consciousness couldn't touch. The problem was that almost every empath Jung studied had no idea what their gifts actually were. They experienced the side effects, the exhaustion, the overwhelm, the sense of being fundamentally different, without understanding the abilities generating those experiences. Today I'm going to walk you through the specific spiritual gifts Jung identified in empaths, how each one functions psychologically, why most empaths have been misinterpreting their own abilities for their entire lives, and what becomes possible when you finally understand what you're actually carrying inside you. Jung's fascination with empaths began not in theory, but in his practice. Patient after patient would describe experiences that didn't fit neatly into any diagnostic category. They'd report knowing things about strangers that turned out to be true. They'd describe sensing shifts in emotional atmospheres before anyone else noticed. They'd talk about feeling physically ill in the presence of certain people, only for those people to later reveal hidden crises or deceptions. Jung's colleagues dismissed these reports. Jung didn't. He started cataloging them. And over years of careful observation, he identified a constellation of gifts that appeared consistently in people with genuine empathic wiring. The first gift Jung documented was what he termed emotional clairvoyance. This wasn't about reading body language or picking up on social cues. Every reasonably attentive person does that. Emotional clairvoyance was the capacity to perceive someone's authentic emotional state, even when that person was successfully hiding it from everyone else in the room, including, sometimes, from themselves. Jung observed that empaths with this gift would sit across from a patient in a group setting and quietly report afterward that the person was grieving, or enraged, or consumed by shame. The patient had shown none of these emotions outwardly. Their performance was flawless. Other group members had no idea. But the empath perceived the truth beneath the mask with the same certainty that you'd perceive the color of someone's shirt. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't an inference. It was direct perception of an emotional reality that existed, but was invisible to normal awareness. This gift develops in childhood, and Jung traced its origins to a specific kind of environment. The child grows up in a home where the emotional truth is never spoken. The parent says everything is fine, while the household vibrates with tension. The family performs normalcy, while dysfunction rots underneath. That child's survival depends on perceiving the real emotional landscape, not the one being presented. So, their nervous system develops an extraordinary sensitivity to what's actually being felt beneath what's being shown. By adulthood, this capacity has become automatic, constant, and impossibly accurate. The devastating irony Jung found was that most empaths with emotional clairvoyance experienced it as a burden rather than a gift. They'd walk through the world feeling bombarded by emotions that didn't belong to them. They'd assume something was wrong with their own mood regulation. They'd seek treatment for anxiety or depression that was actually accurate perception of others' hidden emotional states. The gift was functioning perfectly. The empath just didn't know they had it, so they interpreted its output as personal dysfunction. The second gift Jung identified was pattern prophecy, the ability to perceive the trajectory of psychological patterns before they play out. This went beyond intuition. Empaths with this gift could meet someone, perceive their core psychological architecture, and extrapolate with disturbing accuracy where that person's patterns would lead them. They'd meet a friend's new partner and know within an hour that the relationship would turn toxic. They'd join a new workplace and sense within days which dynamics would eventually implode. They'd watch someone make a decision and feel in their bones the cascade of consequences that decision would trigger. Jung found this ability particularly fascinating because it operated like a form of temporal perception. The empath wasn't predicting the future in any supernatural sense. They were perceiving the present so completely, seeing not just behavior, but the unconscious structures generating behavior, that the future became almost mathematically inevitable. If you can see the angle and velocity of a ball in flight, you can predict where it will land. Empaths with pattern prophecy could see the angle and velocity of someone's psychological patterns and predict where those patterns would land with similar precision. The psychological cost of this gift was enormous. Jung documented empath after empath who described the agony of watching preventable disasters unfold in slow motion. They'd see someone heading toward destruction and feel compelled to warn them. But warnings based on pattern perception sound paranoid to people who can only see the surface. The friend insists her new partner is wonderful. The colleague insists the workplace is fine. Everyone insists the empath is being negative or anxious or controlling. And then 6 months later, exactly what the empath perceived comes to pass. The relationship turns abusive. The workplace implodes. The consequences cascade precisely as the empath foresaw. By then, everyone is too consumed by the crisis to remember that someone tried to tell them. Jung emphasized that pattern prophecy wasn't meant to be used for intervention. It was meant for personal navigation. The empath who tries to steer everyone away from the disasters they foresee will exhaust themselves and alienate everyone around them. The empath who uses this gift to quietly make their own wise choices, who to trust, where to invest energy, which situations to avoid, develops a life that looks almost supernaturally fortunate to outside observers. It isn't luck, it's seeing clearly and acting accordingly. The third gift was somatic translation, the capacity to experience psychological and emotional information through physical sensation. Jung documented empaths who would develop headaches in the presence of someone harboring intense anger, who would feel nausea around deception, who would experience chest tightness near someone carrying unprocessed grief. Their bodies had become instruments of perception, translating invisible psychological realities into physical signals. This gift is perhaps the most commonly misunderstood. Empaths with somatic translation spend years going to doctors for symptoms that have no medical explanation. The headaches aren't migraines. The nausea isn't gastrointestinal. The chest tightness isn't cardiac. These are translations of perceived emotional data into bodily experience. The empath's nervous system has developed a language of sensation that communicates what it's detecting in the psychological atmosphere around them. Jung traced this to early childhood as well. Infants and young children process emotional information through the body before they have language for feelings. The baby doesn't think, "My parent is anxious." The baby's body tenses, their stomach tightens, their breathing shallows. They feel the parent's state in their own flesh. Most children eventually develop cognitive processing that partially replaces this somatic channel, but empaths retain and refine it. Their bodies remain tuned instruments, picking up frequencies that most adults have long since stopped receiving. The practical power of somatic translation, once recognized, is remarkable. Jung found that empaths who learned to read their body's signals could navigate social and professional environments with extraordinary precision. That persistent heaviness in your chest when you're around a particular person isn't depression. It's your body telling you that person is carrying something dark they're not showing. That sudden anxiety when you walk into a room isn't your anxiety disorder acting up. It's your body registering a threat that your conscious mind hasn't identified yet. Learning to trust and interpret these signals transforms what felt like physical vulnerability into a sophisticated early warning system. Before we continue, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises, inspired by the teachings of Carl Jung, designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get True Self-Discovery. The fourth gift Jung identified in empaths was what he called psychic atmosphere perception, the ability to sense the collective emotional and psychological climate of any space they enter. This goes beyond picking up individual emotions. This is perceiving the entire energetic ecosystem of a room, a building, a gathering, even a geographical location. The empath walks into a house and immediately knows whether love or resentment has been the dominant force within its walls. They enter a workplace and can feel whether the culture is collaborative or cannibalistic before a single word is spoken to them. Jung connected this gift to the collective unconscious, his theory that beneath individual psychology lies a shared psychic field that connects all human beings. Most people are only dimly aware of this field, experiencing it as vague moods or unexplained feelings in certain places. But empaths with atmosphere perception are acutely tuned to it. They feel collective energy the way a barometer feels atmospheric pressure. Changes register immediately and precisely. This gift explains something empaths struggle to articulate: why certain spaces feel intolerable regardless of what's visually happening in them. A beautiful restaurant can feel poisonous. A simple park bench can feel sacred. A friend's home can feel suffocating despite perfect decor and warm hospitality. The empath isn't responding to aesthetics or social performance. They're responding to the accumulated psychic residue of everything that's been felt and suppressed in that space. And that residue is as real to them as the furniture. Jung observed that empaths with strong atmosphere perception often became unconscious space healers, people who instinctively tried to shift the energy of any environment they entered. They'd lighten tense rooms with humor, calm chaotic gatherings with their presence, absorb toxic energy to make spaces livable for everyone else. And they'd leave these interactions completely depleted, having performed invisible labor that no one recognized or appreciated. Jung was clear that this unconscious pattern needed to stop. The gift was perception, not intervention. Feeling the atmosphere didn't obligate the empath to fix it. The fifth gift was shadow magnetism, the tendency for empaths to unconsciously attract people who are desperate to have their hidden psychological material witnessed. Jung found this pattern so consistent that he considered it one of the defining characteristics of genuine empathic wiring. People with unintegrated shadows, repressed rage, denied grief, hidden shame, unacknowledged wounds would gravitate toward empaths as if pulled by an invisible force. This wasn't random. Jung explained that the unconscious psyche seeks integration, the way water seeks its level. People carrying heavy shadow material are unconsciously searching for someone who can perceive and potentially hold what they cannot face alone. Empaths, with their capacity to see what's hidden, become beacons for this unconscious seeking. The narcissist is drawn to the empath not despite the empath's perceptiveness, but because of it. The wounded person befriends the empath not by coincidence, but because some part of their psyche recognizes that this person can see them in ways no one else can. Jung described shadow magnetism as perhaps the most dangerous of the empathic gifts because it operates entirely outside conscious awareness. The empath doesn't choose to attract wounded and shadow-heavy individuals. It just keeps happening. Relationship after relationship, friendship after friendship, the same pattern emerges. People arrive carrying enormous psychological weight. The empath instinctively begins the work of witnessing and holding that weight, and eventually the empath collapses under the accumulated burden of carrying what was never theirs to carry. The transformation Jung advocated wasn't eliminating this magnetism. That would be impossible since it's hardwired into the empath's psychological structure. The transformation was learning to recognize it and respond differently. When someone is drawn to you with unusual intensity, when a new person in your life begins revealing deep material unusually quickly, when you feel that familiar pull to help and heal and witness, pause, recognize the pattern. This person's unconscious has identified your gift and is seeking access to it. That doesn't mean you owe them access. Discernment about who deserves proximity to your perception is the skill that turns shadow magnetism from a curse into a compass for identifying who's genuinely ready for growth versus who just wants someone to absorb their pain. The sixth gift Jung documented was temporal emotional sensitivity, the capacity to perceive emotional residues from past events. This is the gift that makes empaths seem most unusual to the people around them. An empath touches an old piece of jewelry and is flooded with sadness. They walk through a historical site and feel waves of suffering. They move into a new home and experience emotions that belong to previous occupants. Their perceptual apparatus isn't limited to present tense emotional data. It picks up traces that linger in objects, spaces, and even in other people's energy fields long after the original emotional events have passed. Jung was cautious about this gift because it's the one most easily dismissed as imagination or most easily inflated into claims of psychic power. He positioned it precisely. Some empaths have nervous systems sensitive enough to detect emotional information that has been, in a sense, encoded into their environment. Whether this operates through subtle physical mechanisms, through the collective unconscious, or through some channel science hasn't yet identified, Jung couldn't say with certainty. What he could say was that the experiences were consistent. The information was often verifiable, and the empaths reporting these experiences weren't delusional. They were perceiving something real through a channel most people don't possess. What ties all six gifts together? emotional clairvoyance, pattern prophecy, somatic translation, atmosphere perception, shadow magnetism, and temporal emotional sensitivity, is a single underlying reality that Jung returned to again and again. These aren't separate abilities. They're manifestations of one fundamental difference in how the empath's consciousness operates. The empath's psyche has a wider aperture than most people's. It takes in more data, processes more layers, perceives more dimensions of any given moment. Every gift is simply this wider aperture expressing itself through a different channel. And this is why empaths are simultaneously gifted and burdened. A wider aperture lets in more light, but also more noise, more truth, but also more pain, more beauty, but also more ugliness. The empath doesn't get to select which frequencies their expanded perception receives. They get everything. The hidden grief and the secret joy, the unconscious rage and the buried tenderness, the psychic residue of ancient suffering and the fresh electricity of new love. All of it, all at once, with no off switch. Jung's ultimate teaching about empathic gifts wasn't about developing them further or expanding them. Most empaths are already perceiving far more than they can comfortably process. His teaching was about conscious relationship with these gifts, understanding what you're experiencing, recognizing which gift is active in any given moment, learning to interpret the data your expanded perception provides instead of being overwhelmed by the raw feed, and making deliberate choices about how much of your perceptual capacity you direct outward toward others versus how much you reserve for your own psychological navigation. He found that empaths who achieved this conscious relationship with their gifts underwent a transformation that looked almost like becoming a different species. They still perceived everything, but they were no longer drowning in it. They could feel the emotional temperature of a room and choose how to respond rather than automatically absorbing and trying to regulate it. They could perceive someone's shadow and decide whether to engage rather than compulsively beginning the work of witnessing. They could sense where patterns were heading and quietly adjust their own course rather than desperately trying to redirect everyone else's. This wasn't about building walls or shutting down sensitivity. Jung was emphatic about that distinction. Empaths who tried to suppress their gifts often became physically ill or deeply depressed. The gifts don't tolerate being silenced. They're part of the empath's fundamental psychological architecture. Trying to remove them is like trying to remove your sense of hearing because the world is too loud. The solution isn't deafness. It's learning what to listen to and what to let pass through without attachment. If you recognize these gifts in yourself, if you've been perceiving emotional truths others miss, sensing where situations are heading, feeling information in your body, reading the atmosphere of spaces, attracting shadow-heavy people, or picking up emotional traces from the past, Jung would want you to know something essential. You're not broken. You're not too much. You're not imagining things. You possess genuine perceptual capacities that most people don't have. And the suffering these gifts have caused you isn't because the gifts are flawed. It's because no one ever taught you what they were, how they worked, or how to live with them consciously instead of being consumed by them unconsciously. Your gifts are real. They always have been. The exhaustion, the overwhelm, the feeling of being alien in your own life. Those were never signs that something was wrong with you. They were signs that something extraordinary was operating inside you without a manual. Now you have the beginning of that manual, not a set of instructions for how to use your gifts, Because Jung understood that each empath's relationship with their perception is unique and must be discovered personally, but a framework for understanding what you are, for recognizing the specific channels through which your expanded consciousness expresses itself, for finally having language for experiences you've carried alone and in silence your entire life. Jung believed that empaths, once they understood and consciously directed their gifts, became some of the most psychologically powerful people alive. Not powerful in the sense of controlling others, powerful in the sense of perceiving reality with a depth and accuracy that most people will never access. Powerful in the sense of navigating the human landscape with a map that others don't even know exists. Powerful in the sense of living in truth, seeing through performance to essence, through pretense to reality, through the stories people tell to the lives they're actually living. That power has always been yours. Every gift you carry has been active since childhood, working constantly, feeding you information you didn't know how to interpret. Now you know what you're holding. Now you can begin the real work, not of developing new abilities, but of finally, consciously, inhabiting the ones you've always had. If you haven't yet, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises inspired by the teachings of Carl Jung, designed to help you find your way within. Click below to get True Self-Discovery